Welcome to this special session of the MOOC in Platform Thinking. Today we have a very special guest, which is Benedetta Arese Lucini, that will share with us her life within the world of platforms. And the very first question is actually about you. So would you like to tell us something about yourself and about how you get in the world of platforms?
Yes, so thank you for having me. Actually, I started finding out about platforms and sharing economy startups when actually it wasn't even a thing. So I worked in e-commerce in Asia, and obviously e-commerce is like a preemption to a platform economy. But really jumped into that world when I was hired by a small startup called Uber at the time. They were in 2012 only in the US, and they were trying to open the European market. And I met the founder, and he had a vision to use technology to facilitate the way people moved around cities. And the idea of let's explain very quickly what I mean by platform. For me, platform or marketplace is a solution that puts a two-sided market together. What does that mean? You have on one side people wanting something, and on the other side usually people or businesses or giving something. And so through technology you put them together and you try and match demand and supply. Usually it's very localized, and Uber, Airbnb were one of the first platform technologies that were created, but now they actually disrupt multiple markets thanks to technology. So yeah, that's how I got in without even knowing. I guess you can get in by just finding the company you like, the project you like, and going for it, yeah.
Well, you were mentioning Uber, which is actually the reason why I've been knowing you as a name a couple of years ago. And in this course, we are also somehow telling a bit about our history in the world of research of platforms. And I remember very clearly in 2014, 2015, when we were starting our research in this world, your name on the newspapers while you were launching Uber here in Italy. And this is the question I've always wished to ask you. How was it? So how was it to actually launch one of the greatest platforms all over the world in a new market in that moment when platforms were not yet the thing they are today?
Yeah, so first of all, it was 2012, so it's like 9 years ago, and it feels like yesterday, I know. I joined Uber, as I said, it was a very small company. And one of the greatest things about Uber was that they really believed that every city had to have its own strategy. And so even if it was one brand, one company, every general manager or every team locally would have its own sort of go-to-market. So it felt like a lot of little companies inside a bigger one. When I joined, there weren't even 100 people in Uber. And when I left at the end of 2015, beginning of 16, there were like more than 4,000. So the growth was really insane. And I actually went to manage from just Milan to Italy to also regionally Switzerland, Austria, and Germany. And as the company was growing and the brand was becoming known, it was much easier. But you still had this thing that in every city you had to start all over because, as we said before, platforms are very local. And so you have to scale them one city at a time. And it really felt like you had to start all over again. So you never felt like it was done. You know, the job was done and now it's a big company and everybody knows, because then you're like, okay, let's launch a new city. Let's launch Torino, let's launch Genova, Padova. We launched a few cities in Italy. Or let's launch a new product. And it's always about educating the market. And today Uber is like a verb, you know, I'm going to Uber a car. But at the time, nobody knew what it was. So It was a really fun challenge, but really exciting. We were a team of very young and motivated people who had no idea what we were going against in terms of regulation, politics, etc. But we had a lot of fun.
Okay, you used that word. We had no idea about what it meant from a regulation perspective. And you were mentioning something in the previous answer. You said, in the end, the platform is kind of a technology that lets you match and let people meet from a digital space also in the real world. And what got me fascinated in the world of platforms is the fact that just 10 years ago, well, no, 10 years ago, maybe no, 15 years ago, it was almost impossible to think about many of the services we have today. And probably regulators could not think at all about the chance to have this kind of services, this kind of organizations. So my question is, what is, in your opinion, quite informed, I would say, the role of the regulator in this process, in the process of launching and scaling these kind of companies?
So I think that regulators obviously will come always after. I've always been fascinated by technology companies because they generally create a revolution from below, as I say, right? It's not like a regulator who says, I see this market, I'm going to change the law to help it. It's usually people use something and then the regulator has to adapt. And so that's what we saw. There's countries where regulators are faster than others, but the role of regulator is really about listening to the different players and trying to find a way to protect the interest of all players inside the system. When I was in Italy, we did a lot of work on the sharing economy, which is let's say, like an economy created by platforms. So the concept that you're sharing goods with other people, right, or services, and we did a lot of work. We went to the parliament. We did a lot, like a tour. It was seemed like a political tour all across Italy and across Europe with the European Union to educate about the role of sharing economy within economies, right? And how it could be enhance the GDP of countries and how the workers within this economy could or not be protected. And so regulators sometimes just say, this cannot be done, and they start like this, and then it's important to kind of rein it back and find a solution in between, because clearly there's always an between super capitalism and the role of a protectionist country. So they have to be playing in the middle.
That's interesting, and I think that Uber is actually one of the companies that's so the implication of different regulators the most. I've spent a part of my research activities in Ireland, and I discovered that there the situation is completely different. Actually, there are taxi drivers on Uber because what they allowed was completely different from what happened here, and this probably goes back to what you were mentioning with this local dimension of this global platforms.
Yeah, and in Uber, especially in transport, every city has a different regulation and every region has a different regulation. So it's not only the state. In finance, which we will talk about later, actually every country has a different regulation. So it's not that easy to say I'm a global platform, because you have to scale literally city by city, country by country, and adapt to the local regulation. And it was interesting to see how maybe Italy was very different from Switzerland in terms of regulation, which is next door, but it was very similar to Japan or Korea, and it literally, because for some reason the regulators thought in the same way. So it didn't matter the borders. Sometimes it was really strange, the places where you had similar laws.
That's fascinating to know that very far away places can be similar than places in the neighborhood. You were mentioning the finance world. What happened after your Uber era?
Yeah,
let's say?
after my Uber era, I spent some time in venture capital, and then I started my own company with other co-founders, and we co-founded a platform called Oval Money. And the idea was to bring, again, thanks to technology, financial products to everybody. So the idea was that a lot of people weren't going to invest their money because they thought they needed to know what they had to do, or they needed to have connections, or they needed a lot of money to be contacted by the big banks. And so we decided you could invest and save your money with starting with €1. And on the other side, we had providers that would create specific strategies, investment strategies, put them on our platform, and the user would choose which strategy they preferred. So we did a lot of things around the thematic investing, which now is very popular. When we started in 2017, 18, it wasn't like a thing, but now, investing in the ESG, in green, investing in social themes, or investing in certain industries like space or gaming or sports, it's something that is happening more and more. And the idea would be professionals would create a portfolio of companies that were within a theme, put them onto Oval, and then people could invest. So it gives the opportunity to smaller companies to have access to a lot of new investors, and to investors to start investing with €1, because, again, one of the big things of platforms is they only work when there are economies of scale, so when there's a lot of people on them. So a platform doesn't work if it's me and you, okay? A platform needs a lot of people on both sides. And that's the beauty and also the hard part of how platforms scale. But Oval had this vision, and it's continued to want to educate the market to the fact that it actually is very simple to start investing, and it's trying to cut that barrier between normal people and the financial world.
It's very interesting, the word you use. You said Oval, or anyhow platforms, can educate the market in a certain area, in a certain field. It's interesting, and probably it's something we even seen with the COVID. The fact that we are users on certain platforms brought us closer to a certain way of dealing with things that became extremely popular over the last years. So it's interesting, this fact that the founder can actually see the platform as a way to educate. Yeah. It's nice. So you said that you spent a bit of time in a venture capital fund, and that you got in touch with the other organization, I guess with other platforms as well. Would you like to share with us any, curiosity you had, any strange platform, strange situation you've seen in this world of platforms?
So the interesting thing about platforms, by studying them, seeing them, and meeting founders and working in the industry, is that you realize that a lot of people think that it's a product just for millennials or Gen Z, and it's a product that is very digital and you need to be very sort of techy to use. But actually, the two things that surprised me the most was, first of all, that it's very human, because they are actually making connections between people on the supply and the demand side. I think Airbnb is the greatest example. You have somebody sleep in your house, but you have like a person who lives in a city doing your guide. You have like a person driving you around the city. You have people bringing you food. So you're meeting people. So it becomes like super connected. And they've been used more and more to create like a neighborhood within big cities. So actually, even they don't only scale city by city, but neighborhood by neighborhood. And so it becomes like you're sort of in love with your new neighborhood again, instead of feeling alone in big cities. And then the second thing is, I've always found it so fascinating that users are not that young always. You find very diverse type of users. You find, I remember when we first launched Oval, one of the people who wrote to us was like, I want to use my pension. And he was a pension, like a 65, 70-year-old guy who wanted to start saving and investing a part of his pension. So it's not just for the young kids, let's say. Another example is we had drivers in Uber who would tell us they were doing this because their wife died and they were lonely. They didn't want to stay in the house, and so they would like to dress up and go out, and they would feel again they could connect to people, and they had like a purpose. And so it's really fascinating how this economy actually touches very different areas. And if you want also women, for example, is something I've always focused on, is finding women drivers or women in finance, and like really finding these networks that are not obvious because technology usually talks to young male kids or young people, and actually you will find that it applies and helps a lot more groups of people. So for me, this is really, really cool.
It's very cool because you're kind of listing the misperception about platforms.
Yeah.
It's global, but actually it's very local. It's technological, and it is, but it is very human
yeah.
related, very neighborhood related in many cases, as you were mentioning. It's very interesting. One of the goals of this course is to go behind the surface of platforms, and I think you're really going in that direction with your words. And you said it before, Uber became a verb. So Uberize, the Uber of something, Uberization, even it's written somewhere. Still, after a lot of years, we have many successful platforms, but I would say for sure much more platforms that didn't make it. So that they claimed that they were becoming the Uber of something, but in the end that they couldn't make it. What's the difference, in your opinion, between those that actually make it and those that claim to be the Uber of something else?
So first of all, not every market has to be disrupted in a platform way. So I think at a certain point there was a little bit of a Uber mania. So everything was a Uber of everything. The second thing, which is actually the most interesting, is that people believe that platform scales because of just demand. Like if a user will use my platform, I am going to go for the marketing of getting more users. But actually, it's really interesting how these platforms, and I've spent a lot of time on this, working on this with different founders, is like actually how do you really grow supply? So if for Airbnb is number of homes, for Uber is number of drivers, for Deliveroo is number of restaurants, because actually that is the one part that is the hardest to scale. It's the one that gives you the advantage, and it's the one that when a customer comes to you and finds what they want, they will not go away. If they don't find it, you will have a lot of customers and no cars, and then a person will never come back. So the supply side is usually more sticky, and it's the one that drives the growth. And then the demand comes. So always focus on supply. The supply is also the hardest to get because clearly, generally in the supply, it's professionals. So you're talking to professional people, professional drivers or professional service providers that come to home for like cleaning, for example, is an example, or they come for beauty. And all these professionals have other jobs, have other work. So to convince them to come to your platform, you have to fake it. And one of the interesting things we used to do as tricks is to say, come to our office, and we were in a co-working space. And so we would say, this is all the office of Uber. Obviously, there were like 15 startups, and we were like one desk with 5 people or 3 people. And we would say, this is the whole office. So it made it feel like, okay, you're a big company. And so you really have to a little bit fake it until like enough people come up. And then they start getting enough work because you're then getting demand. And then that's how platform grows. So I think that balance is something that doesn't happen all the time, and it's very difficult, and it requires a lot of work and a lot of capital in certain cases. So you really need to think about the long-term plan for scaling a market. And then the problem is you have to do it a second time or a third time when you open a second, third, fourth market. So that's the hard part of seeing how a platform, some make it and some don't.
Yeah, that's very cool. And well, that's very cool from the outside. Probably living it, it's very challenging, but it's absolutely very, very interesting. You mentioned, you were mentioning many companies, many startups, many ideas that became platforms. Something that I always wondered is how we can use this model, this idea of doing businesses in a quite different way from what we were used to in established companies, in existing companies. What's your thought on that?
So I think that there are two things that companies can take from this. So one is internal, so changing the organizational work inside. So again, a company is very structured. There's a pyramid, there's like a hierarchy, the decisions are only made on top. I think this platform model creates a way of making decisions or creating connections that are horizontal within companies. And so there can be a lot of like HR or anyway company specific internal opportunities. And the second is about thinking how, and this depends from company to company, but it depends how a company distributes its product, its services today, and how it can think about using a little bit more technology and a little bit more of this philosophy of like exactly connected economy to distribute their product. And for example, one of the examples that come to mind, if you think about insurance companies, they're the most old-fashioned companies in the world. They probably make still a lot of money, and so they never want to change the way they're doing things. And the way they got distributed, the product was very much the same throughout the last 100 years. And now they're trying to see if there's ways in which they can sell insurance, car insurance or health insurance through an app or directly to consumer, not going through like promoters, etc. And they're starting to understand that then if they want to do it this way, the type of insurance they sell can't be like a 15-page document that you have to read and like sign, but it has to be something which is like on an app, it's readable in one screen and it's like subscribable straight away. You can like decide to take the insurance for 1 month and take it off the next and these kind of things. And also on top, if you think about it, insurance had to adapt to this platform economy. So there had to be a new insurance for the driver of Uber or a new type of insurance for the Airbnb home. So I just took one industry that is like, for me, completely old-fashioned that actually was changing pretty fast with this new platform economy. And that's how I believe like CEOs and strategy professionals of bigger companies should think about their business models.
Okay, so reaching the end of this conversation, you've been in many different roles in your career in the world of platforms. You've seen the venture capital perspective, you've been the founder, you've been the country manager, you've been in different places. What's your piece of advice for someone that wants to enter there? What would you say to someone that said, I want to create a platform?
So create a new one from scratch. I think it's the advice I give for any startup. First of all, choose a company that you really believe in and choose a project that you really believe in. Don't start a company just because it's like the Uber of something. So a platform should be the method to getting to your goal. Your goal and your mission should be, I don't want to start a platform. My mission should be, I want to change transport. I want to change this industry. I want to change insurance. I want to change hospitality in a way that is more affordable, more human, so you have to choose your mission. And I really like founders, and I also angel invest sometimes in startups that have founders that have a deep mission, because doing a startup and doing a company is very complicated. It's probably one of the hardest jobs there are. So you need to have that motivation. You need to love the idea and your concept, your mission. So why are you there? Why are you doing this instead of taking a job? Why are you like struggling all the night to find supply or demand when you could be in a company and they pay you a salary? So this is the first part. Secondly, surround yourself by mentors. And when I say mentors, this is another problem. People think mentors are people who have, white hair and they've been in the industry for 15, 20, 30 years. Sometimes the best mentors for me have been people who were doing the same. They were starting a company as well, because maybe they had my same problem. And you could ask and they tell you the truth, and they help you throughout the way. So maybe ask people who've worked in other platforms or who are starting a platform themselves, and surround yourself with mentors. And number 3, and in platforms is even harder, is be very well connected to your market. In platforms, you have 2 markets. So to your users on one side and to your service providers on the other. You have to spend so much time talking to them. I think people believe I'm the CEO, and so I'm going to manage. And instead, one of the things I've always loved is I spend a lot of time, at least a few hours every week, even when I was super busy and going and traveling and had a bigger job, spending time replying to customers. So on the chats or online or on the tickets that they sent, or meeting with the drivers, for example, of Uber, or meeting with financial providers and talking to my customers in Oval, because this gives you a really good idea of what your market is. And that's how I found out about the fact that I wasn't really targeting only young millennials, but a whole group of people that could be bigger than that. And so I think these 3 are advices that I would give any startup founder. And in platforms, you just have to do double the work because you have 2 sides to your business. So that's it.
So that's very helpful. Thank you. One last question. You said something that got my attention, because it's not obvious that someone that stay within an interesting world, such as the one of platforms, can say that clearly. You said, I don't think that the entire world, all the industries, all the companies should become platforms. And so the last question I'd like to ask you is, looking ahead, what do you see for platforms, the next challenge, the next opportunity that they are bringing? What's coming in your, informed opinion?
Well, as I said, I believe actually platforms will become more and more local. So there's a lot of local problems that can be disrupted by the platform technology. And I think they will arrive to more and more people. For sure, some companies have scaled a lot. They have millions and millions of users. But if you think about how big populations are, it's just starting. And I actually believe there is a lot more to be done. For example, for the world is hard to say, but one of the things that I've always thought could be really interesting for Italy as a country is to disrupt really tourism and to use platforms for the one thing that we do really well, which is our country's beauties, and trying to find ways in which we can really use technology to make people closer to our country, our culture, our food, our beautiful people, our beautiful landscapes, and tourism, I believe, is just starting. I mean, Airbnb opened a huge world, but for a country like Italy, I believe tourism can completely be changed by using platform economy. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much for staying here with us. Thank you very much for all your insights in the world of platform.
Thank you.
See you for something else in the world of platforms.
I really appreciate it. And yes, I'm working on my new project. So it's still in a platform world, let's say. So yeah, looking forward to it. Okay. Launching.
So for a new course, we'll have a new interview.
Exactly.
Thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you.